Hello, welcome to MD Media's weekly show, The H Panel. The H Panel starts now. Today, following the failed peace talks between the Oromo Liberation Front or Oromo Liberation Army and the Ethiopian government, this week we'll be asking the question why peace remains elusive in Ethiopia. The H Panel is back to share the insights from the panelists. Today, I'm happily joined by Itana Hapte, Duke Burbridge, and Sket Kapisa. Itana and Duke, a long time. Welcome back. Scale, thank you for joining us today as well. So we start with the first segment. What stood out for each of the panelists? Duke, let's get started with you today. Uh, we have been longing for your charts and numbers. So welcome again. Gekat, start what stood out for you.
Well, what stood out for me, since I wasn't on last week, what stood out for me was the restart of food assistance in Ethiopia and in Tigray for since 8 months now. This is going to happen, they said, in December. I don't know precisely when in December. This is certainly welcome news, but it is a glimmer of hope and not much more than that, because we can't be sure exactly what that's going to mean, what the restart's going to mean. It also raises questions that it also leaves questions unanswered, such as why did the aid get stopped in the first place? That's something that has never been fully answered. They said that there was theft. There's always theft when there's aid. They said that there was diversion. That's nothing new. What the problem that they said, the reason that they had to shut it down was that the aid wasn't getting to people. And if you look in this chart, this chart's been in one of my articles for Tegat. It shows that by their own accounting in their February emergency food assessment, the food did get to the people who needed it. It says about 46% of people should have gotten food at the time that they took the survey. That was about the amount of food that they said that they distributed. So there's really no good reason why all of these people had to die, why thousands of people had to die, why they said up to 90 or 100,000 people right now in Abigail are still starving. People all over Tigray are still starving. We don't really know exactly what's going on the ground, because most of the sources of information have been shut off. Even the sources of information from Tigray are not putting forward new information in the past month. The one single source we do still have, if you could go to the next chart there, is the admissions for children under 5 years old with severe acute malnutrition. Now you can see the two dots here. If you can see that, I don't know if that's big enough, but if you could see the two dots here, it shows the rate of severe acute malnutrition in Tigray. In February, it was at 3.1%. When they did the SMART survey, SMART Plus survey in August, it was up to 5.7%. Now that's a huge increase. But if you look at the graph, this shows how many children under 5 years old, these are babies and toddlers, how many were able to access care, were able to be admitted for treatment for severe acute malnutrition. And you see this goes down very sharply. Around March, when food was suspended, it was at about 11,000 children in the past 4 weeks had received treatments for severe acute malnutrition. That had halved by the end of May. It halved again in June. And in the last recorded week, in the first week of November, only 1,800 children had received care for severe acute malnutrition. Now, that was something that was supposed to not be affected by the pause. It was supposed to still go on. It should have increased. It increased elsewhere in Ethiopia. It did not increase in Tigray. So the people who starved to death in Tigray, the children and the adults who starved to death in Tigray, there should be a lot of questions being asked about why they starved to death and how the USAID and the World Food Program can make sure that they get food to the people who need it. Tigray is starving right now. They need food.
Thank you, Duke, for that. And like you mentioned, Abergele, right now as we speak, children are dying of starvation, and there are people uh, who are trying to raise some fund for that. And those who would like to support that, please contact us on EMD Media's contact information, and we'll connect you with those who are coordinating this. Okay, Itana, what about you? What captured your attention over the past week?
Thank you, Getachew. So, for me too, the issue of people's days because of starvation in Tigray is what stood to me this week. And second one is a topic of our planned conversation, the negotiation between OLA and the regime in Addis Ababa, which of course collapsed. So I won't repeat what Duke already said, but this is important on multiple levels to be paid attention. And the obvious one is people are dying for no reason, and especially the reason they don't understand. Kids are dying, and helpless people are dying. So this is concerning. But this issue speaks beyond Tigray, and it speaks about a lot about Ethiopia, and it speaks about the regional dynamics in the Horn of Africa. It speaks to the condition in Ethiopia and the path Ethiopia preferred to take, because this is happening not before conclusion of the Tigray war. It's not happening. It didn't happen, at least partly during the war. We know what happened during the Tigray war. So this happened, and this is happening before our own eyes, a year after conclusion of the war, at least after 1 year after Pretoria. So if this is just a week after Pretoria, we may say, the method of helping dying people is becoming difficult. It is too soon to assess any side. Even if this happens 2 months after Pretoria, we could say, it may be too soon for people who wanted to help the dying and starving people in Tigray. But this is over a year after the signing of Pretoria, and it's a very good illustration of the path the Ethiopian state wanted to take. One is to continue, despite the conclusion of the war, collective punishment of Tigray. And it also says quite a lot why the peace in Tigray is still not consolidated, why security issue is still one of primary concerns in Tigray and northern Ethiopia. So this is not something happening by mistake. It's happening by design. Of course, international donors suspended aid and they resumed this week, but the state have enough ability to help dying people because it has enough money to buy weapons, if it has enough money to buy drones, it has enough money to help these dying kids. So that's why I said this is a clear illustration of what Addis Ababa wanted to do 1 year after the conclusion of Pretoria. At another level, it's also an illustration of failure of the Tigray interim government. This should not happen at any cost when there is at least an interim government in place. The ability to help dying people may be beyond what the interim government could do, but saving lives of people should have come first before anything. So still, the features that characterize the Tigray war are still there. So despite the conclusion of Pretoria, the problem that we saw during the Tigray war are still there, and this is an illustration that the Tigray problem, or even the war itself, is not concluded.
Thank you, Itana for that. And as you can see on the screen, there is the email address of UMD Media and Telegram phone number, and you can reach us. And if you want to support the starvation affected population and children in Abergala, Tigray, contact us and we'll connect you with those who are coordinating this. Skel, I know you drove 4 hours to join us. Thank you for doing that. We really appreciate your participation and insight. What stood out for you over the past 7 days since we met last time?
I think what stood out for me this week, and maybe on the end of last week, is basically the collapse of the Dar es Salaam process. And this is not news anymore. It's not a news that stands out, but the explanations after the collapse of the process, and the explanations that many people were giving really stood out for me in light of what must be done in the future. Now, some say that the talks collapsed because the distance between the two parties, the positions of the two parties, were unbridgeable. Others say that the Ola leaders were inflexible, intransigent, even to accept the government offer to share power. Still others attribute the collapse to the lack of trust between the two parties, or the parties in conflict. Now, first of all, I must say that much of these conclusions are based on speculations and guesses, or any particular message that anyone wants to telegraph for the future. The explanation that stood out for me is one that was latched on the idea of trust deficit. It has gained some traction in the media, but this explanation, in my opinion, is implausible in analysis. It's insidious in its purpose and an impediment to future negotiated settlement. Here is the reason why I say that it is really one that would not work to encourage the parties into the negotiating table again. Because if there was deficit, trust deficit, it wasn't on the part of the OLA. The OLA leaders traveled all the way to Dar es Salaam, trusting the process, if not the government. If OLA leaders did not trust the process, that the process could yield a positive result, they wouldn't have chosen to make this extremely risky decision of sending their commander-in-chief and his deputy and other commanders, important commanders, to Dar es Salaam. At least they trusted the process might have some chance to reach an agreement. So the attempt to explain the collapse of the talks on trust deficit does not apply to both sides. Ola has no history of signing an agreement and then backtracking. But the Ethiopian government sure does have a track record of signing an agreement and then reneging on it. The TPLF did this in 1991. The PP took a page from the TPLF playbook and did this in 2018. And in 2018 and 2019, the PP has signed 5 agreements with the OLF, but had violated each one of them. So there is a track record if the Ola leaders did not trust the government. But let me say something about trust. Trust is not this warm and fuzzy feeling. Trust presupposes a relationship. To expect trust where the possibilities of where the relationship did not exist is foolhardy, because the relationship between these two parties is one of mistrust rather than trust. One would not expect trust where it did not exist, where that relationship did not exist. Secondly, trust involves taking responsibility for one's action and also possibilities of disappointment. To expect trust where there was no willingness to take risks and to address the fundamental causes that actually led to the conflict in the first place amounts to retreating to a safe space, the safe space of both sidism, and does absolutely nothing to learn from the mistakes of the present engagement and to return to a negotiating table with renewed resolve to arrive at a conclusion and an agreement. So trust is a decision. It's a conscientious decision, a difficult, deliberative decision that one makes to reach an agreement. It's not necessary to have trust because once an agreement is reached, actions may, the actors could conform or not conform. But this would be verified. This would be validated. This would be monitored for confirming and non-confirming. So what I mean is that you don't need to trust each other in order to reach an agreement. That's not necessary. Trust itself is not necessary because an agreement is followed by a system of verification, validation, and reporting. So unless one wants to take that safe place of both sidism, trust is not a requirement. And I say this because this is the explanation that had some traction in the media, and people are really falling for it. And next time if they meet next time, the two sides meet next time, and then we're going to say, oh, both sides did not have enough trust. Trust is not what is required. What is necessary is pragmatism. What is necessary is pragmatism informed by the realization that the path of military action to resolve political problems by eliminating the opposition has not worked. Success in negotiations required pragmatism that rejects the tactic of co-opting the opposition in order to destroy it. Might work with some politicians, gastronomic politicians. It might not work with others. It requires that realization. So trust is not a precondition for success in negotiations and reaching an agreement. What is required is not another round of brutal campaigning, of draining the sea in order to catch the fish, but a pragmatism that can give rise to a determination to find common ground at any cost. That's what stood out for me, the explanation of this week about the collapse of the OLA-PP government negotiations in Dar es Salaam.
Okay, thank you, Scale. That is a good segue to the topic of the day. So we'll be talking about why peace is not working may not work in Ethiopia. And we really will be picking your mind on this. Itana, maybe if you can walk us through the rounds of talks that had happened first in April, I guess, then in May. In fact, in May, everybody seemed to be optimistic on what might play out of that. And then we saw what happened, and Scale gave us a good picture of what happened and why and so on. So for our viewers, what are we talking about in terms of what failed now? But we will also go to the larger picture of peace, whether it's with Tigray, and maybe reports are coming out that there could be another war with Eritrea as well, and so on. So generally in peace, but walk us through what happened in April, May, and now October and November. Itana.
Thank you. So in April and May, the two parties, that is Oromo Liberation Army and the PP regime in Addis Ababa, had talks in Tanzania. Many people were enthusiastic in the process of looking at the process of negotiation in April and May. The talk did not succeed even then, but the statements that came out from both parties, the statements were encouraging, because both said, look, we didn't succeed now, but we will return to this talk we hope to reach at some agreement. And that is why months of another round of enthusiasm followed, especially in Oromia, where people are dying daily because of the violence, especially on the side of the government. People were looking to this round of negotiation, which tried to build on what the both parties started last April. That meeting happened, that talk happened in Zanzibar, and now a new round in Dar es Salaam. So this time, the Oromo Liberation Army represented itself very well. Commander-in-Chief of the army, Jan Murrow, was there, his deputy was there, and some other commanders were also there. So in looking at the representation of OLA, you can say it represented itself to the best it could. And the Oromo leadership, the Oromo Liberation Army leadership, came out of their military base in the far western part of Oromia, trusting the process of negotiation. So they held these talks for over a week, I think. But when the statement came out, both sides showed that it collapsed. Now, on the side of the PP regime, you can see that the regime itself did not represent itself well from the beginning. Military commanders were sent to the negotiation, which I think is legally speaking not appropriate, because the commanders of the National Army do not represent the executive organ. They represent the state. But the regime, true to its practice, sent military commanders for negotiation. When the talks did not progress, it sent another two senior politicians, and it was concluded a few days after two senior politicians from Addis Ababa joined the talks. Now, let's start from the statement that both sides published, because that is a very good lens to look into what really happened and why the negotiation collapsed. If we look at the statement published by the regime, it's 2 pages long, and it raises a number of issues, but there are some key phrases and key words that represents its impression of why the negotiation failed. That key phrase for me is at the point that the regime said OLA tabled an agenda of the 1960s, which could not be conceded at all from the side of the government, the 1960s. And it asks that these demands were answered long ago, and there is nothing to concede to these demands. Before concluding before presenting my conclusion of what they meant by this, let me say what the OLA said. You put it on the screen, and the OLA said, we wanted to address the main demands of our people, that is the Oromo nation, by engaging these talks both in Zanzibar and in Dar es Salaam. So OLA's statement did not explain in detail what these demands are, but we all know the key national demands of Oromo struggle. So it means that the OLA went to that table with Oromo national demands. And this is clear because all opposition parties that are supposed to represent Oromo struggle had their offices closed, their leadership arrested and put in prison, and some of them were killed. It means that the entirety of Oromo national demand fell on the hands of the Oromo Liberation Army, and that is, I think, why OLA enjoys substantial support in Oromia. So they said we tabled our people's national demands. And they say we wanted a meaningful change in the governance of the Oromia region. So in short, OLA want, at least in principle, the negotiation process to accept Oromo national demands. So these are primarily about self-determination. It's related to self-governance, autonomy, the issue of language and culture, the issue of benefit from economy of Oromia, and also the city of Addis Ababa. All of these issues are addressed in the 1995 Constitution, which is still in office, which is still a governing document for the country. So by principle, it's not difficult to accept what the OLA tabled from what I see, because it's constitutional, it's already written down in the Constitution, it's already coded into the country's supreme law. So the OLA never, from their statement, tabled beyond the country's constitution. But the Addis Ababa regime said this is the 1960s demand. It's already responded to, and there is nothing to concede about the demand that the OLA presented. So this issue of the 1960s, that you can see it on the third paragraph, what I'm talking, written in Amharic. So what happened in the 1960s? The key political activity in the country and in Ethiopia in the 1960s concerned two national issues. One, the issue of nationalities, and the issue of the land. So what the PP regime referred to as the 1960s demand and presenting it as something backward. This is a simple interpretation of what they say. It's a backward demand. That is Oromo national demand. In short, the PP government said they do not accept at any level any element of Oromo national demand. So you can see from both statements, you can see where the problem happened. The OLA presented Oromo national demands, and the government said, I do not accept this at any cost. So although speculations abound, although people say lots of things, I think these two statements tell us, at least indirectly, where the negotiation collapsed. And it is primarily, in my view, because the regime in Addis Ababa does not abide to the supreme law of the country. Because as I said earlier, the OLA's demand or national demands of the Oromo, they say they tabled at the negotiation are within the purview of the country's constitution, and PP government is considering this as a backward demand and a demand which was responded to. Let me say one final word and finish about this thing. What PP government said it was already responded to is again not explained in the statement they issued. But they seem to suggest that the structural problems of nationalities, including the Oromo, have been addressed when the 1995 Constitution was instituted. But as we all know, over the last 3 decades, the structural functioning of the Constitution itself was in problem. It instituted regional states. It instituted various institutions that support multinational federalism in Ethiopia, but it was stuck because it was largely unimplemented.
Okay, thank you, Itana, for that. Eskiel, I want to follow on this same topic, but you can take it to the larger scale of the peace and war in the region in Ethiopia. The reporter just yesterday in its editorial says part of the reason why the negotiations thus far failed is the inability of all sides to embark on confidence and security building measures necessary to establish trust between them. So, I mean, what is your take on this in terms of why this failed? You already alluded to that, but I want you to expand if you can. And then the question of what's next. I mean, we'll also come back to that at the end. But in terms of the dynamics in the region, what the prime minister has been saying, including yesterday, where he said, uh, I mean, he seems to be preparing people. There could be no peace, maybe, for a few years and so on. So, if you can reflect on that, that would be great. Scale.
Sure. Now, to yes, I saw the editorial and the interview in the Reporter, and that's not what I was responding to, but other explanations that say there need to be trust. Well, I mean, trusting, like I just said in my what stood out for me is that trust is not necessary. You just get to an agreement, have the courage to negotiate. Okay, have the courage to negotiate with your adversary. No one trusts an adversary. Adversaries are not to trust each other. So that's why I wanted to reject from the outset that trust is a precondition for a negotiated settlement. But the negotiations actually, or the supposed negotiations in Dar es Salaam and earlier in Zanzibar failed because of a couple of things. Now, whatever is reported in the media, as I said, is really based on speculations. Both sides did not come out and say this is why. Now what we have to do is to read between the lines of what allusions they made in the statements that both sides issued. Ola issued a statement twice. First, acknowledging that the highest leadership of their organization had arrived in Dar es Salaam, expecting to make peace with the PP government. That's the first one. But in that press release, the Ola representative or Ola officials actually say that we came here for a peaceful settlement, to seek a peaceful settlement that responds to the aspirations of our people and honors the sacrifices of our gallant comrades. That's it. A peaceful settlement is what we need. That simply means not getting everything that they wanted, but also through negotiations arrive at an agreement that could settle, and a settlement that could address the issues that actually led to the conflict in the first place. In the second one, they added in the first paragraph of what they issued, they repeated this idea in which the organization said that they involved their leadership, the highest level of their leadership, to come to Dar es Salaam and negotiate a peaceful negotiated end to the conflict. So they were committed to the peace because they raised this issue twice. And I understand, anybody who has a mind can understand that Dar es Salaam, or the transit from the western part of Oromia to Dar es Salaam, was a very risky undertaking for the two commanders, the highest commanders, the commander-in-chief and his deputy, to get to Dar es Salaam, and there was really no security for them in Dar es Salaam, so to speak. It's a risky undertaking, it's a risky endeavor, but they took a chance for peace. That's number one. In the second one that you just showed, what they said is that we tabled a series of inclusive proposals to have a meaningful change in governance. They never said a government. The meaningful change in governance. If you interpret that, and from whatever insight that I have from what transpired in Dar es Salaam, is involving all stakeholders in Oromia. An arrangement, a transitional arrangement, not necessarily a government, but a transitional arrangement that will return Oromia to the path of democratization. What that means would be decided. The democratization or the meaningful change in governance would be resolved at the negotiating table. But they made those proposals. And the response of the TPP government was three responses. Number one, they said they are the state, not the government. It is the state that they have. This is in the negotiations, the insight from within, that they have monopoly of violence. They can. They are responsible with law enforcement and the monopoly of violence monopoly on violence. That means the government has all the wherewithal, the power to visit or mete out all kinds of heavy guns and drones and the entire security and military apparatus of the state to destroy Ola. That means either accept or be destroyed. Accept what we're giving you or be destroyed. Second, they believe, and this is the thing that PP does not know the difference between being an administration for 5 years and being the state. Said we have all the power to distribute state power and state resources. So if you wish to avoid or be spared being destroyed, come on in. We'll give you some positions in government. Join us. You will be co-opted. Your cause will be co-opted as well, and you will be destroyed, or else. The third is that the state has enemies, or the government, the PP. The difference is not very clear between the two. The government has now enemies, northern enemies. That means Amhara and Tigray. Join us against them because they are also your enemies. Join us in fighting them. Otherwise, we will lose together. That's the proposal on the part of it. That means they were not ready to address the fundamental issues that led to conflicts everywhere, in Tigray, in Oromia, in other places. The social contract, the contract that the peace settlement of 1991 was abrogated. And that's what they mean when, as Itana said, when the PP says these are old ideas, these are from the 1960s, means that they don't believe in the idea of the notion of the very concept of the right of nations to self-determination that is enshrined in the Ethiopian constitution. They don't believe in it. They always say that the 60s generation are the ones that have gotten into all of these conflicts in the first place, and they have refused to die out. This is the PP's position. So there was no room for negotiations, to so to speak. So why did it fail? In my analysis, I think the PP do not know what negotiations simply means. For them, negotiations does not involve give and take. It's a one-sided offer. The opponents, they will either accept it or be destroyed. The concept of negotiation altogether is that for PP. Second, to negotiate means to sit down at the negotiating table with their opponents means that any negotiation does not include the power of the PP to rule Ethiopia indefinitely. That's the two issues that leads to the failure of negotiations, because there was really no negotiations in Dar es Salaam. Ola tabled some series of proposals. The response on the part of the PP is simply to say, join us or we'll destroy you or we'll lose together. So there was really no negotiations that occurred in Dar es Salaam because of the attitude that PP has towards power and the Ethiopian state.
Great, thank you, Skell. Duke, take a big lens on what's happening in the region. The international media and domestic media are reporting on a possible war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And we have covered this a bit in a couple of episodes of H panel over the past week. but still, this is a big item of interest in the Horn of Africa. So, what is your reading of what has happened this week between OLA and the Ethiopian government, and vis-a-vis in terms of Pretoria agreement as well? The government, without any qualm, says it has implemented, and it's the other party which is not implementing, which is the TPLF. And you can also take this Red Sea issue into the picture, and why peace is elusive in Ethiopia. Duke.
Yeah, I mean it is very hard to disentangle the idea of, you know, what Abiy has planned for Eritrea for port access. I mean, the language is very bizarre. The victimhood of geography, this idea that being a landlocked country is somehow new, or somehow it's, you know, a crisis that needs to be solved right now, or a reason to go to war. It just shows that this is not the priorities of the Ethiopian government are really not on the people of Ethiopia, because my God, how much would be lost if they decided to try something with Eritrea? I don't know that they'd win. I don't know. I don't know where Tigray would fall in this, but I do know the people of Tigray would suffer. I know that the people of Ethiopia would suffer. The people of Eritrea would suffer. It's a no brainer that this would be a dumb idea. It's almost such an absurd idea that it's not worth signaling that you're thinking about some action there. Hopefully they can come to some sort of agreement or something on port access, because it just doesn't make sense that he would go after a port in Eritrea, or you know, any of the other countries around there. It's ridiculous. The idea that you know, if peace can be made in Oromia, that would be a huge national step. I mean, if it was, of course, if it was an enduring peace, a sustainable peace, something that actually had a dividend. And I wonder how much of the negotiation is being sort of sidetracked by some of the bellicose rhetoric of Abiy and the PP regime, and a recent memory, not just of the failures to uphold agreements in Oromia, but also in Tigray most recently, because we had international observers in Tanzania for the negotiations. We had, I believe my camera was there. Also, I believe the Norwegians were there for whatever reason. But these negotiations, the international community, whoever it is, I know that's a nebulous term, but whether it's special envoy for the Horn of Africa, Mike Hammer, whether it's one of the other 7 special envoys for the Horn of Africa being involved in these, they need to stick to their obligations under international law. They need to be looking out for the civilians that are being hurt by these wars, because these are very destructive wars for the civilian population. And the Ethiopian government will say, well, this is just war. We're trying to fight these. You know, of course, everybody's a terrorist if they go to war. But it's the Ethiopian government that's doing a lot of the targeting of civilians, according to the latest numbers from ACLED. We need to be looking at this with our eyes wide open from an international perspective. We're not there to be a lawyer for the Ethiopian government, a regime that's been failing and failing and failing to make peace. If that is indeed what they're trying to do, they may be succeeding in keeping the country in a state of war. But it's getting down to the point where I don't know if the presence of the United States in these negotiations is going to be helpful or is going to fuel more conflict, because it gives Abiy the opportunity to step back, or whoever's there gives them the opportunity to step back and say, well, we'll just keep on fighting for a couple more months, because we've been killing civilians in Oromia and nobody has, you know, the United States, Europe, they've made noise, a little bit of noise, but not really. Nobody's really stood up and said you shouldn't do that. It hasn't damaged our credibility. We just got done with a horrible genocide in Tigray. That fuels that makes his position stronger and very much more difficult to get around that feeling of impunity that the Ethiopian government has, that was put in place by the international community's dealings with the Atri Commission, with the 3 years of a very slow moving conflict, with the conflict in Oromia before the situation in Tigray happened. All of these things have created a sense of impunity, I think, and that's something that is going to fuel conflict. Now, of course, that's not the crux of the violence or of the conflict. There's a lot of things that the United States does not really have an interest in. They should be promoting the rights and the liberties of everybody, but they shouldn't have a say in what language is spoken in Addis. I mean, that's not for the United States to say. But the fact that the United States appears to be in full retreat on human rights, on protection of civilians, we saw it in Tigray, we see it now in Gaza, we see it in Oromia, we see it everywhere, where the United States is just washes their hands of human rights. That has to stop. That is making the United States a very bad actor in all of these situations. Now, I don't know how much that's impacting the negotiations. I don't have insight. Of course, if my two colleagues don't, I certainly don't have an insight of what was said and the reasons why it broke down. But the United States needs to be playing a better role, a constructive role. If it's going to play any role at all, it needs to be constructive. And I don't see that happening. And I think it's very dangerous because now we have an administration in Ethiopia that really feels that there's nothing holding them back from killing civilians, starving civilians, making wars in other countries. I don't know if that would get a response from the US because, quite frankly, I'm not sure the US is really up for protecting anybody's rights in Eritrea. So it creates a very dangerous situation. You have to wonder how far this can go before it becomes a real barrier to peace. And it feels like the United States is fueling conflict with the way that they're handling these situations. And that's no disrespect to Mike Hammer. He seems to be, he does a good job at what he's trying to do. I'm just not sure he's getting the right direction from higher up, and that I don't know if he's being as effective as he could be. But I think it remains to be seen.
Thank you, Duke, for that. So our viewers who want to support starving kids and families in Abergele, Tigray, what you see on the screen is the account number you can use. It's under Bruchti Haile, Takhlit Haile, and Shawit Garazier in Maqala. That's the account number in the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia. So we'll continue to show that until we end the show. Maybe let's go to the final thought, and you can also take the. I was showing earlier the ICG. We covered it last week as well in terms of what's happening in Amhara region. A war is still raging, and the war with Eritrea could be coming anytime soon, according to some sources. And it's always important to highlight what are the opportunities for peace and what should be done by who, like Duke was alluding in terms of what the US should do and can do. And Itana, what is your final thought and how things might play out in terms of the negotiation with OLA and federal government? Some were saying there was a pressure that both parties should say the door is still open. We'll come back to it and we'll try another round. But that seems not to be the tone of the Ethiopian government. So you can also speak to that, Itana.
Exactly. I'll just pick up from where you start, from where you stop. The position that the PP regime took this week during the Dar es Salaam talk is not new. It followed a pattern of consistency the regime took since 2018. This regime rejected invitation for negotiation with OLA when Abagadas and elders intervened to make peace. Second, when part of OLA soldiers disarmed at the invitation of Abagadas and elders, the regime mistreated, and some of them were said to be poisoned in the concentration camps. And the phase that the OLA or any person from that side had on negotiation retreated. Third, over the last 5 years, when several parties cried out for negotiation, it was Addis Ababa government under the leadership of Abiy Ahmed that rejected the peace talks, proposed peace talks. OLA, on its part, made multiple statements that it is ready for negotiation. So the position that the government took this week followed this pattern of rejecting peace, taking any opportunity to reject any meaningful negotiation. The reason may be many, but what stands out is that Abiy Ahmed and his colleagues are using Oromia as a base for power. And they don't want any rival in this region. And it doesn't seem that Abiy Ahmed and his colleagues are retreating in favor of peace. So this is the situation in Oromia. If you go to Amara, another largest part of the federation, it's over 2 months now since Amara militias and many types of armed men, paramilitary forces started fighting in a guerrilla warfare against the government. And it doesn't seem to be improving. It's continuing. Latest reports show that these militias, commonly known as Fano, are growing in strength, pushing the government, and it's a recent memory that their movement made the regional administration to collapse. So one of the largest regions in the federation is in a state of war. Oromia is in a state of war. Tigray, after 1 year of conclusion of the Tigray war, 1 year after Pretoria, is what we are looking at. People are starving. And the peace itself is very fragile from what we see. And like I said at the beginning, this is an illustration of what Addis Ababa wanted. The leader of PP party doesn't seem to be regretting of what the country encountered under his leadership over the last 5 years. Over 1 million people died reportedly after the beginning of Tigray war, and many more were displaced, many people wounded, and many are languishing in prison cells. And regime forces are taking out prisoners from various prison cells, especially in Oromia, and killing them overnight. So when you look at all of this, you may think that the leader of this government might be regretting for causing all of these problems. But instead, like you touched on earlier, suggesting another possibility of war with a neighboring Eritrea. After ruining the economy, after putting the country in a very difficult, precarious position for the last 5 years. So in short, Addis Ababa and the government in Addis Ababa not interested in meaningful peace negotiation. It's not interested. So as many opposition groups are suggesting, as long as Abiy Ahmed and his government is in place, it doesn't seem that the country will have the opportunity to tracked back from the verge of collapse on every side. But what is disappointing on the other side is that multiple opposition fronts in the country and out the country are not creating any meaningful cohesion towards the conclusion of what is going on in the country. So Addis Ababa is taking turns fighting Tigray, Oromia, and Amhara region now. Three key segments of the federation. So it's important to have in mind, as a conclusion of what I was saying, that Abiy Ahmed and his colleagues are simply not interested in meaningful negotiation in favor of peace. When the rebels, like the OLA, for example, showed the maximum interest and took risks traveling from the far western provinces in Oromia to Dar es Salaam, trusting the process of negotiation. So whatever is happening to Ethiopia, I would say, is primarily because of Abiy Ahmed's government.
Thank you, Itana. Scale on the semantics of this press release from the government. Suddenly, it talked about terrorist organization, all that, but also the fact that the IGAD was a critical element in all this. You can correct me if that's not the case. How do you see the IGAD or other regional organization playing in terms of the next step, given that why Jalmaro and his deputy took that risk, as you mentioned, and as Itana again underlined, is perhaps some are saying because the IGAD was critical in guaranteeing that and so on. So do you see that happening again, or what is the fate of the negotiation between the two parties, but also in the larger scale of the region, as final thoughts, Scale?
I mean, I'm just reading what the last statement, which says that if the what is that? The Ethiopian Federal Democratic Republic, the government of the Ethiopian Federal Democratic Republic, always would want to stand for peace, but we will continue our governmental responsibility of law enforcement. And that's what I said earlier, that the Ethiopian government sees itself not just as an administration, not an administration that has power for a limited period of time. It does not see itself as a parliamentary administration. The prime minister of Ethiopia doesn't see himself as a prime minister, first among equals, who can be brought down simply by a parliamentary vote of no confidence. They see themselves, he sees himself as the state. He sees himself, his party, as the state, which means that everything is available to him, whether that is the entire apparatus of the security and military, the economy, the media. It's available to the PP, because the PP is the guardian of the Ethiopian state. Others don't subscribe to it, and by PP's definition, if PP defines them, whether that is the TPLF or the OLF, if it defines them as anti-Ethiopia, unpatriotic, well, they're going to be anti-patriotic and terrorist and whatever they want to label them, and then the fury of the Ethiopian state is going to be upon them. The difference in perception of what it means to be a government, an administration for 5 years, and the Ethiopian state is the fundamental impediment to any peace. I think when the prime minister compares himself to Menelik, to Haile Selassie, to Mengistu. He always compares himself to these emperors. There is no way that a prime minister could be compared to an emperor or a king or anything else. The Ethiopian state had been juridically extinguished, the imperial state, that means, extinguished in 1994 with the adoption of the 1995 constitution. He sees that as a problem. The constitution is a problem because it was written by liberation forces that emanated from the 1960s generation, who actually designated as people who refuse to die out. So that's the fundamental problem of perception of what his power is returning. So when he proposes the idea of a port for Ethiopia, if you are a rational person, a responsible person, you would think that you would resolve the issues that are within the country in order to face another adversary that is outside the country. That means this government would do anything, in my mind, would do anything, offer anything to resolve the conflict in Oromia, to resolve the conflict in Amhara. But while war and conflict are raging in these two, accounting like for 70% of Ethiopia's population and land size, or the Ethiopian economy, while you are at war with these two, why would you propose the idea of obtaining access, a port? So but Mr. Abiy, it doesn't really matter. He's not the prime minister. He is the anointed by the divine to save Ethiopia and return Ethiopia to its glorious past. That's where everything begins. Having said that, let me say this about the port and the next war, or the next theater of war, because there are so many in Ethiopia, about Eritrea. There have been speculations about what the intent is, but the prime minister himself has made it clear in his speech in parliament. He said that we want port, and he admonished his critics, saying that all of you who claim that you didn't know what we were doing, where were you? And I'm roughly quoting what he said. Where were you when we established a navy? Didn't you have access to YouTube? Didn't you hear us that we established a navy? And he says that we built a navy, and that is clear indication that there is no other agenda in Ethiopia. We meant we needed a port for the navy. That means this is not access to the sea. His demand is not access to the sea for Ethiopia. It's not an access for an outlet for Ethiopia. So the economic arguments about access to the access to the sea, his security, ostensibly security agenda, where he said, what if the global powers that are competing in this region start shooting at each other? Well, it's not about that either. The historical claims that he made, the references that he made, the historical claims that Ethiopia had of access that Ethiopia had, or the struggle that Ethiopia had to the sea, it's not about that. It's not about the legal claims that Ethiopia could make based on international law. The only legal claim that Ethiopia could make is the 1950 UN General Assembly resolution. He doesn't refer to that. He could say that we need a navy because he said, and I'm going to underscore this, in the coming 10, 20, 30 years, Ethiopia is going to be a great power. And I didn't add or subtract of what he said. It's going to be a great power whose interest extends to ports, distant ports from the homeland, which means that it's a great power that is going to have to police the high seas and protect Ethiopia's interest, not in the Red Sea region, but somewhere else, maybe in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean littoral. That's what his dream is. And for that, he needs a navy. So what he's talking about is having a port where he could base his navy that he had created on Lake Tana. That is what he said. And his officials have now made it clear by posting on the internet their pictures showing that no questions asked. It's self-explanatory. We need access to a port. And his ambassador in Kenya have said somewhat astonishingly that Ethiopia is land-blocked or something like that, land-blocked, but we need access to the sea. So the whole drama that we saw this month, or maybe a little bit more than that, is that they will start with negotiations to obtain a port for Ethiopia based on international law. But this is not the goal, because there is no international law that would permit Ethiopia to have access to the sea. So they're going to have to use force. And in this, I am speculating, in this, he has the go-ahead. He has the go-ahead for reasons that I don't have to delve into at this time. He has the go-ahead from Western governments. He has the encouragement and the support of the UAE as a middle power. And he has this grandiose interest to obtain a port for Ethiopia when he was the leader of Ethiopia. These two combined, I think he's going to have to resort to force to obtain a port, and that requires going to war with Eritrea. And let's not underestimate Abiy's capacity for miscalculation and irrationality. Let's not misjudge him this time, because we have misjudged him so many times. I thought that he would not invade Tigray. I thought that he would not start war in the Amhara region. He did. When he says he's going to do something, we just have to accept him for his words. I think war is imminent in the Horn of Africa.
Okay, thank you, Skel, for that sad news. Duke Burbridge, the final word for today is yours.
Thanks. I mean, it's interesting just hearing the discussion about it. I mean, that is the prosperity party. I mean, that's the prosperity doctrine, is that you build a navy and then you'll get a coast, and then you'll get a port. These things are just absurd. But my final word, my final thought, I wanted to just bring it back to Tigray again, and the decision to open up aid access. Right now, we really don't have a good idea of what's happening in Tigray. As I mentioned, of what is happening on the ground. The harvest should be coming in, but it was a harvest with so many challenges. There's about 1 million farmers who can't get to their fields. There's still occupation of places like Europe, places like Western Tigray, but more than that, also areas of Southern Tigray, areas of Northern Tigray. They did not get the agricultural inputs that they needed, which would have been a very good investment for aid agencies to make, but it didn't happen. They have damaged equipment. They have, a lot of stuff was looted, a lot of stuff was damaged. They're going to have a hard time making a harvest of this. And on top of that, you have drought that was maybe not expected to hit Tigray as hard as it did, but it did. You have locusts, and there are a lot of challenges to this harvest that are going to leave pockets of the population, perhaps large pockets of the population, without access to food. The fact that they're going to restart aid, the USAID and the World Food Program is going to restart aid is of course welcome news, as I said. But how is that going to play out? The last couple of times this happened, it took a couple months for aid to actually ramp back up a little bit. Right now, people are starving to death. People are dying right now. They need food as fast as it takes a human being to starve to death. That's when they need that food to get there. Not on anybody else's schedule, not on DC's time or anything like that. They need that to happen. Now, fortunately, what should be a very big advantage here is that USAID and the World Food Program spent 8 months while people were starving to death. They spent 8 months refining their system, streamlining their system, verifying all the beneficiaries, setting everything up. So in December, a couple of days from now, when they turn that switch back on, now aid never works like flipping a switch, But if you have an 8-month lead up to it, if nobody ever rushed them at any point of this process, they were never pushed. They were never rushed. They got to take just as long as they wanted to, no matter how many people died. They should be able to restart aid to everyone who needs it immediately. Even with limited funding, it can't be that limited because they haven't been distributing any food for 8 months. So they should still have a little bit of stockpile resources there, but they say they need more money. This should be the best investment that a donor could make right now, is to give money to the World Food Program to distribute food in Ethiopia, because there probably isn't a more sophisticated food distribution system in the world than the one that was built with 8 months to build. All of these things should happen. There's no war. There's limited occupation. There is still some occupation, and this is hurting a great deal of people. But if you look at their most recent access chart, it shows that most of Tigray is accessible according to UN OCHA. So they should be able to get food to the people who need it quickly. And if they don't, they are out of excuses. They are out of excuses. It would be a very, very terrible thing to have made people wait for 8 months during the entire lean season, to make people wait for food. And then when it came time to restart aid, to not be able to get food to the people. That would be something, that would be unimaginable. But I can't put it past them. I do not trust that the World Food Program is ready to roll out food, even though they've already had pilot rollouts and everything. I do not trust that USAID is ready to roll out food. This idea that this is on a 1-year trial period, this does not signal a lot of confidence in their system, but it should be airtight. They're out of excuses. So if food doesn't reach the people, if people are still starving 1 month from today, then we're going to have to ask some serious questions about the purpose of USAID and the purpose of the World Food Program, because this is horrible and it has to end. Thanks.
Thank you, Duke, for that concluding remark. I just want, before we leave, sign off, to show again this is what Duke was alluding to. People are already dying, children are already dying in Abergele, Tigray, and the environs, and it's because of starvation. This is the account number 1000588341791. An account opened by Brucht Haile, Tahlit Haile, and Shawit Garziher. You can contact Shawit with professor at Maqala University on this account, where they are campaigning to raise fund to immediately serve food to the starving children. And this is among others. They are trying to raise funds through different means, donations, of course, and this one is a pen art, which in 4 hours should be out. So people are bidding for this, and everything that will be collected through this bidding and other means, donation included, would be to the Abergele children and Abergele starving families in Tigray. Gentlemen, thank you as usual for your insightful contribution today, and we'll definitely be coming back, unfortunately, to these peace war discussions again in other episodes. Good night from here. Thank you, Duke Burbridge, Eskel Gabisa, and Ethan Hapte for your insight today. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
You have been following us live on the H panel, where we talked about peace in Ethiopia following the failed talks between Oromo Liberation Army and the Ethiopian government and the region at large. And we'll be back with yet another episode of the H panel on Sunday next week at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, once more before I leave, this is the Abergele support for children starving in Abergele, Tigray. Families, children are dying because of lack of food, because of, among other things, the famine there, the aid suspension that was there for months. And Shawit Garazihar, Prophet Haile, and Tahlit Haile are coordinating fundraising for the starving kids and families. The account number for Commercial Bank of Ethiopia is 100058834171. So you can also transfer internationally to this account. If you have this account, the account number, Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, and the names of the people, you should be able to transfer that. And again, in 4 hours, the bidding for this will be over. So people are bidding for this art by Yibrah Kalayu, who used pen only to make this amazing artwork that depicts the resilience of Tigrayan women. Today's show was that, and good night. Have a good week.